the people beside Yu Menglong in his final moments. The night began like any other, quiet and unassuming, yet there was something almost unreal in the air. Yu Menglong's home felt warmer than usual, filled with laughter, soft music, and the comforting scent of home-cooked food. It was the kind of evening that promised peace, not tragedy, and no one could have imagined that this would be the last time they would see him smile. He had invited a few close friends and family members over. They thought it was just a casual dinner, but in truth, it was more than that. It was his unspoken farewell. There was his longtime manager, his assistant, his makeup artist, and his childhood friend who had known him since before fame found him. They all sat around the large wooden table, laughing at old memories, teasing each other, completely unaware of the storm of emotions hidden behind Yu Menglong's calm eyes. He looked different that night, though not in a way anyone could explain. His smile was gentler, his tone softer, his gaze distant yet peaceful. He spoke less about work and more about life, about moments that mattered, about dreams that once kept him awake. Every time someone mentioned his future projects, he would quietly change the topic, saying he wanted to focus on the present, on what was right in front of him. At one point, his assistant asked him why he looked so thoughtful. He chuckled and said, "I just want to remember everyone's faces like this." They all laughed, thinking he was just being sentimental. No one understood that those words carried more weight than they realized. When dinner was over, he asked everyone to join him on the balcony. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, and the city lights below shimmered like tiny stars. Yu Menglong leaned on the railing and said softly, "Look at how bright it all is, yet how small it seems from here. We chase so much, but in the end, it's the people beside us that make life worth it." His friend Luchin turned to him and smiled, saying he sounded like a philosopher. But there was something haunting in the way Yu Menglong looked at the sky, as if he was searching for something only he could see. He stayed there for a long time, breathing in the night air, his expression calm and almost too peaceful. As the hours passed, people began to leave. One by one, they hugged him and said goodbye, promising to meet again soon. He hugged each of them tightly, longer than usual, whispering small words of thanks. When his makeup artist left last, she noticed that he stood by the door watching them go, his eyes glistening in the dim light. She thought he was simply tired, but there was more behind that look, a silent farewell he couldn't bring himself to speak aloud. When the house grew quiet again, only his assistant remained. She had insisted on staying to help clean up, but Yu Menglong told her to go rest, that he would handle it himself. She hesitated, but he smiled and said, "You've done enough. Go home, you deserve peace too." It was the last thing she ever heard him say. Hours later, the world changed. News spread like wildfire, and disbelief flooded every corner of social media. Fans cried, friends were silent, and colleagues couldn't comprehend how someone who smiled so brightly could vanish so suddenly. Those who were with him that night felt the weight of guilt pressing against their hearts. They replayed every word, every glance, searching for signs they might have missed. The following morning, as the house became a place of mourning, his assistant discovered something unexpected. On the table where they had all eaten together, there was a small notebook. Inside were pages of words written in Yu Menglong's familiar handwriting. It wasn't a script or song lyrics, but something far more personal. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it means I've finally found peace." He had written about his gratitude, his dreams, and the people who kept him going when fame became too heavy to bear. He thanked his fans for their endless love, his family for their patience, and his friends for always staying even when the cameras were gone. Every word carried warmth, hope, and quiet understanding. It was not a goodbye filled with sorrow, but one filled with gratitude. In another part of the notebook, there was a paragraph that made everyone cry. He had written, "Do not remember me with tears. Remember me with laughter. I lived a beautiful life because I met beautiful souls." When this message was made public days later, fans across the world began holding candlelight vigils. Streets were lined with flowers and photos of Yu Menglong, and people whispered his words as if they were prayers. Across cities, his songs were played softly in cafes, his dramas rewatched by millions, his smile replayed on screens as if keeping him alive just a little longer. One of his closest friends later shared that in his final days, Yu Menglong had been more at peace than he had ever seen him. He had spoken about forgiveness, about letting go, about finding happiness in the simple act of existing. He had said he didn't want to be remembered for his fame, but for the moments when he made people smile. Weeks later, another discovery surfaced, a short video recorded just hours before his passing. In it, he looked straight into the camera, his expression calm and filled with light. His words were soft but powerful. "If you are watching this," he said, "please promise me something. Promise me you will keep living, even when life feels heavy. Promise me you will love deeply, forgive freely, and never let pain steal your kindness. That is how I want to be remembered." The video spread like wildfire, uniting millions of hearts in shared grief and admiration. Fans across Asia and beyond began using his words as daily reminders to cherish their lives and their loved ones. In the end, Yu Menglong's departure became more than a loss, it became a lesson. Those who stayed with him that night learned that peace sometimes wears a quiet face, that farewells aren't always loud, and that sometimes the most powerful goodbyes are wrapped in laughter and love. They still talk about that night, the way he smiled, the way he watched the city lights, the way he told them to keep shining no matter what. For them, it wasn't just his last night, it was a final gift, a moment frozen in time that would live on forever. And though he is gone, his words still echo. The ones who stayed remember not the silence that followed, but the light he left behind. Yu Menglong may have taken his final bow, but his spirit remains, forever woven into the hearts of those who loved him and the millions who will never forget the warmth of his last smile. The night had fallen softly over the city, its lights reflecting across the quiet streets as if even the world itself had paused to breathe. Inside that room, time seemed slower, almost tender, as if afraid to move too fast. Yu Menglong lay still, his usual calm presence now quieter than ever. Around him were not cameras or scripts, but faces he trusted most, those who had walked with him through years of laughter, exhaustion, and dreams. Xing sat closest to him, her fingers trembling as she held his hand. She didn't say much, but her silence spoke more than words could. Every tear that slipped down her cheek carried a story, a memory, a moment they had once shared between takes when no one else was watching. The sound of the studio lights flickering felt heavier than ever, and yet, beneath that weight, there was peace, the kind that only love and understanding can bring. Dylan Wong arrived shortly after, his expression unreadable at first. For a while, he just stood by the door, unable to step forward. The man who had always carried himself with confidence now looked like a boy who didn't know where to place his grief. When he finally moved closer, he whispered something no one else heard. It was a promise, a quiet vow to carry Yu Menglong's legacy with dignity and truth. Xing, who had been filming nearby, rushed in moments later. She was visibly shaken, her voice caught between shock and disbelief. But when she saw him, she didn't collapse or scream, she simply reached out, brushed his hair gently, and said the words that everyone felt but couldn't bring themselves to speak. "You can rest now. We'll take it from here." The air in that room grew still. No one moved for what felt like an eternity. Each person seemed to be fighting their own memories, remembering the way Yu Menglong used to brighten a set with a single laugh, how he always asked about everyone else before talking about himself, how he could turn even the hardest moments into quiet lessons of strength. Wang Yiba leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the dim light above them. Xiao Zhan stood beside him, his jaw tense, his hands clenched. They had both worked with Yu Menglong at different times, but in that moment, there was no rivalry, no fame, no noise of the outside world, just silence, thick and sacred. They didn't speak, but the weight of their shared grief filled the space between them like a silent pact. Then Xing finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, yet steady. She told everyone that Yu Menglong had recorded something days before, a message he never got to share. It wasn't a farewell or a confession. It was gratitude. Gratitude for the love he had received, the people he had met, and the moments he had lived. She said he wanted them to remember him not for the loss, but for the laughter, the late nights, and the dreams they built together. Dylan closed his eyes as she spoke, the memory of their last conversation echoing in his mind. Yu Menglong had told him once that fame was temporary, but kindness would always outlast the noise. Those words now felt like a final gift, a quiet truth meant to stay long after everything else faded. Outside, the first light of dawn began to rise. It touched the curtains, spilled softly onto the floor, and wrapped the room in a gentle glow. One by one, they stood, each saying a quiet goodbye in their own way, not of sorrow, but of respect. Xing placed a small white flower on the table beside him, her tears finally drying as she whispered, "You'll never be forgotten." As they stepped out, the hallway seemed endless, filled with the echoes of everything they had shared. Reporters would later write their own versions, fans would mourn across the world, and tributes would pour in by the thousands. But for those who stayed that night, the truth wasn't in the headlines, it was in the silence, the friendship, and the love that lingered long after the lights went out. And in that silence, they found peace. Because even though Yu Menglong's journey had ended, his story had only just begun, living on through every life he had touched, every scene he had brightened, and every heart that still whispered his name when the world grew quiet.